Introduction to Philosophy, Lecture 20, on Free Will and Determinism. So, after last lecture, the question you may be asking is, why do scientists and philosophers take the challenge of determinism to free will so seriously? After all, it seems pretty obvious that we do have free will, right? Well, in the course of our text, we've made some pretty drastic leaps from ancient to modern philosophy, and a lot has happened in the world during that time that hasn't been covered. Over the past 100 years, many discoveries have been made that changed the scientific and academic community's general views of the world. These days, not many in these communities endorse ideas that are non-physical. That is to say, very few people endorse views that allow for the existence of things like immaterial minds, Cartesian souls, ghosts, and the like. People and the world are seen as completely explainable in terms of physical beings, processes, and events. Since the metaphysical claim endorsed by most scientists and philosophers is that all that exists is physical, that means that everything that exists is subject to the laws of physics. If everything and everyone are subject to the laws of physics, then every event, including our thoughts and actions, are physically determined. Pierre-Simon Laplace articulates this well in his work, A Philosophical Essay on Probabilities. You may also be curious why a math book would be referred to as philosophical. Well, this is because historically, the development of new sciences has been the business of philosophy, as was the case with biology, psychology, computer science, and here probabilities, with people like Pascal, who is credited as one of the fathers of probability, and Laplace, who has made contributions to its development. Laplace's articulation goes as follows. We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future. An intellect, which at a certain moment could know all the forces that set nature in motion, and all the positions of all items of which nature is composed, if this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula all the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. The intellect Laplace describes has come to be known as the Laplacian demon, or Laplace's demon. If the demon can look at a snapshot of the universe, it can use the laws of physics to calculate all future events either infinitely into the future or until time ends. Furthermore, the demon can calculate all events back to the Big Bang, or whatever the beginning of the universe and time was. The immediate objection is often that the movements of planets and other inanimate objects could be calculated, but the movements of humans and other animals cannot be calculated using the laws of physics because we have minds. Humans make decisions based on information, like the things people say and do, and we're also motivated by sociological factors like trends and events that can be social, political, or economic. The idea being that we might be able to loosely predict an individual's behavior using psychology or a population's behavior using sociology, but human behavior cannot be predicted with the same accuracy as physical events using the laws of physics. However, recall that on the current philosophical and scientific worldview, all things are physical, even minds. There are no immaterial souls, there are no ghosts. But why do so many scientists and philosophers believe this? Well, because that is what the evidence suggests. Indeed, thoughts can be measured in labs using devices like EEGs, fMRI. Numerous studies have been conducted showing that people's brains make decisions before they're consciously aware of it. Using fMRI, neuroscientists and cognitive scientists are able to accurately predict people's decisions in experiments as early as 10 seconds before the subject is consciously aware that they've made a decision. In other experiments, scientists are able to record brain activity and match it up to people and objects that the subjects are thinking about. So, while we believe we are making decisions, what is actually happening is our unconscious brains are making the decisions. And as we become aware of the decisions the brain has made, we come to believe that our conscious selves made the decision in that moment. We have the impression that our conscious minds are driving our decisions and actions, but in actuality, our physical brains are driving them, and our consciousness is just along for the ride, mistaken in its belief that it's got the wheel. So, if the mind is physically measurable, then the mind is physical. If the mind is physical, then the mind is subject to the laws of physics. Therefore, if we get back to the thought experiment, since the demon can calculate your entire life's worth of actions, your actions are determined. However, if our actions are just inevitable links in long causal chains of events that go back billions of years before we were born, and we literally could not have done otherwise in any of our actions, then how can we claim that anyone is morally responsible for anything they do? As our text says, we can't say that someone ought to have done otherwise when their actions are immoral because ought implies can. If someone couldn't have done otherwise, we can't say they ought to have done otherwise. It would be like requiring someone to levitate, which is impossible. And I can't say you ought to do something that is impossible. It just doesn't make any sense. But what if we reintroduce the soul? Could the possession of an immaterial soul possibly give us free will? After all, if the soul is not physical, then it wouldn't be subject to the laws of physics. However, this puts us in a predicament. First of all, we would need a reason to posit the existence of something that no one has ever had any evidence of. And second, we would need to explain how a non-physical entity like a soul could possibly interact with a physical entity like a brain. How could these entities do anything other than pass right through each other when they attempt to interact? Furthermore, we find ourselves precariously violating Occam's razor, which states, entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity, which may be exactly what we're doing when we posit the existence of an immaterial soul. In the end, positing the existence of an immaterial soul doesn't appear to be a very promising way forward if we're attempting to salvage free will. But what if we reintroduce God? For this current discussion, let's set aside the fact that we no longer have the free will defense we depended on to show that the existence of God is compatible with the existence of evil. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that God exists. Surely, God can see to it that humans have free will in an otherwise deterministic universe. But logically, is it that simple? Let's consider the nature of God as he is discussed in Western philosophy. God is omnipotent or all-powerful, omnipresent or everywhere, omnibenevolent or all-good, and omniscient or all-knowing. God's nature leads us into similar territory. Not only did God create the universe and everything in it, God knew everything about the universe and its entire future before he even created it, because he is omniscient. Therefore, God created everyone to do exactly what we would do before we ever did it. The implications of this are obvious. If God actually exists, then none of us have free will in the sense that we are discussing. Rather, we are all essentially programmed machines just running the program God installed in us when he brought us into existence. Which raises the question, what is the point? Why are people judged by God for doing what God himself programmed them to do? In the end, God can serve the same theoretical function as Laplace's demon. If God can see the past and the future as clearly as the present, all at once, then where is free will? How is anyone blameworthy? How are we any different from programmed machines? So, even if we suppose that non-physical entities like God and the soul exist, they don't seem to bring us any closer to the possession of free will. But let's suppose that determinacy itself doesn't hold. Does that help us in any way? If we briefly consider the idea that there are no determinate forces between causes and effects, then how do our actions follow from our intentions with such law-like regularity? It seems like I decide to raise my hand, then raise my hand, and it happens just as I intended it. In other words, if there is no causal connection between our reasons for acting and our actions themselves, then how could it be that our actions seem to follow as if they are determined by our reasons for acting? If there is no determinism, then our actions would be random, and we would have no reason to think that our reasons for acting had any impact on our actual actions. Therefore, we would be remiss to suppose that determinism did not hold. Some try to make room for free will by appealing to quantum mechanical uncertainty. The idea is, if at the most fundamental levels of physical reality there is uncertainty, then, at the macro level that humans inhabit, there is room for free will, since it is possible that not everything is perfectly determined. However, this is a hasty solution for a few reasons. One reason is that it puts us back in the same predicament we were in before we considered a universe that was completely determined. Namely, when things are uncertain, our actions would be random and still not free. Another difficulty for this view is that it assumes uncertainty at the quantum physical level of reality somehow leaks into higher supervening levels of reality where things behave with law-like regularity. In short, just because some things are uncertain at one level doesn't mean that things are uncertain at other levels. This has been a general sketch of the problem that can be articulated in multiple ways that vary in sophistication. There are many ways these issues have been addressed by different thinkers, incompatibilists and compatibilists, and we'll examine some of these ideas in future lectures. But before we close, let's have a brief recap. Since all things are physical, including minds, all things are subject to physical laws. If all things are subject to physical laws, all things are determined, including human behavior. If human behavior is determined, then humans do not have free will. If things are not determined, then our actions couldn't reliably follow from our reasons for acting, so we would still not be free, because our actions would be random. If we try to explain free will by appealing to the existence of an immaterial mind or soul, we have no way of explaining how our souls could interact with our bodies, so the idea lacks explanatory power. If we try to explain free will by appealing to the existence of God, we find that the existence of God precludes the possibility of free will, since God knew everything we would do before we were even created. Since God created everyone and their futures according to his plan, we are all essentially programmed and still don't have free will. So, the question is, do we have any logical reason to suppose that we have free will?